732D just recently dropped in the main client of Dota, so let's take a brief look at the many hero changes that followed suit with the update. Flag Bearer Creep has had its bounty goal slightly adjusted and improved from before. The overall reason for this is to give the position 4 and 5 a tiny bit more gold, courtesy of the gold per minute decrease that was recently changed. Blade Mirror received a decent buff, now being even better at returning damage on activation, which will of course work when farming creeps too. Of note is the ability to activate it during channeling, which opens up a lot of possibilities for heroes like Pudge, Enigma, Warlock and other channel heroes to make clever use of the item. Bloodstone got a minor nerf. This one is primarily directed at Leshrac. Boots of Bearing and its associated item Drums of Endurance have both had their already too high gold costs somewhat lowered. Crimson Guard has received a +2 armor. The item on average is very rarely bought, and with the massively needed nerfs headed for Wraithpact, it seems obvious that Valve intends to buff other defensive items. Guardian Greaves, much like Bearing and Crimson, has had its threshold aura increased by 5%, with its cost going down by 100 gold. It's still very expensive, but the item is now better than before. Pipe getting an additional 50 magic damage blocked when activated. A small stat increase on Veil of Discord, now granting +1 more to all stats. Wraithpact being the one that was hit the hardest by all, and the reason why a lot of other defensive items were buffed. Wraithpact's aura no longer reduces magical and pure damage at all, and will only reduce physical damage from right clicks and spells that do physical damage. Alchemist has had his Grievous Greed buffed somewhat, with his added spray being lowered in cost to make him able to ramp up a bit faster to compete with other carry heroes. Arc Warden's nerfs were mainly directed at his Aghanim Scepter's potential and how crazy good it would be on both offense and defense, lowering down the additional spark ray spawn from it by 30 seconds. Axe received a very minor speed buff to his talent. Quite a big buff to Bounty comes in the way of his Shadow Walk now reducing attack speed all the way up to 40 at max level. This is particularly great in later stages of the game to mess with scary carry heroes. Bristle has received a minor health regen increase. Brood Spiderlings has had their vision decreased by 300, which is going to hurt her survivability somewhat when they're used efficiently. The bigger nerf comes from her Aghanims having its unhit effect lowered by 1 entire second, thus its damage and root duration. Chaos Knight has yet again had his minimal crit increased, this time by 5%, and some light buff to his talents. Crystal Maiden, being a rather strong hero as of recently, has had her allies' mana regen lowered slightly, from 1.5 to 1.0 at max level. Dark Willow has finally had her Bramble Maze damage buffed, meaning it's now a lot more lucrative to put more skill points at it, increased from 50 to 65 at max level. Dazzle has had his poison increased by 1 second at all levels, at the cost of slightly higher mana per use. This is a buff. Minor damage increased to Death Prophet's Crypt Swarm, and a little bit more oomph on her magic resistance talent. Glimpse slightly nerfed due to the mana cost increase on Disruptor, with his Static Storm AoE at 25 not really mattering too much in the average game. Doom surprisingly buffed with small yet additional damage on his Scorched Earth. Minor base damage increase to Dragon Knight, with his Dragon form now being a static 105 seconds on every level instead of just 18. This is pretty big. A slight nerf to Gust on Drow at lower levels, the hero still remains very strong. Actually a very huge buff to Earth Spirit, given how much the hero plays around Stone Remnants. 2 second faster generation is a lot for this hero, with Magnetize also buffed for an additional second with his level 10 talent. Enigma's Eidolons has had their attack range adjusted somewhat at lower levels, remaining the same once maxed. This makes his early game a little bit less oppressive. Some much needed buffs to Grimstroke. His movement speed on Inkswell is now better, with his Aghanim's ability now penetrating spell immune enemies. His Soulbind talent also got increased by 5%. Gyrocopter's level 15 Flak attack talent has been increased by 1. It really does seem like Valve wants carry Gyro back. Keeper of the Light has had his turn rate improved slightly, making him feel better to play, and a little bit of an increase in base damage. Kunkka's Ghost Ship is now a bit more potent, with a slightly bigger width to it and more bonus speed to him and his allies when it arrives. Legion Commander getting a minor buff to her Moment of Courage proc chance with her associated talent, which is surprising given that the hero is already one of the most dominant offlaners in the current patch. Leshrac got hit hard on this one. His shot radius is now smaller, but the biggest nerf comes from Pulse Nova having a 1 second cooldown after being toggled off, meaning that you cannot generate as many pulses as before, with their damage also decreased on top of it. Minor nerfs to his mana talent. A small damage increase to Lion's early game spike, which will help him in the early laning stage. His Hex talent has also been improved by 1 second. Marcy yet again got hit really hard this time around too, with the jump range on rebound significantly nerfed in her early levels, and even having a 50 range decrease at max level, with the attached flying speed also being lowered. Her sidekick has also been lowered on all levels by 5%. It's safe to say that her early game compared to before is now a lot weaker. Some minor buffs to Mars in the form of Bulwark penalty being lowered, with some small buffs to his level 20 talent. Medusa has had her Mystic Snake slightly buffed in range, with each bounce the snake now also making it bounce faster, making it much harder to predict in the laning stage. Cast point and armor increase to Monkey King's Wukong's command makes him a bit more reliable to get off a good ultimate. Morphling was nerfed quite a bit overall. The cooldown on his waveform for all levels is one thing, but Aghanim Scepter no longer reducing Morph's cooldown really hurts him. Plus, his 25 talent being changed from 2 waveform charges to lowered cooldown is significantly worse. Naga has had her strength gain slightly adjusted downward, with one less base armor, making her a bit less tanky during laning stage and initial jungling. She is predominantly still the same hero though. Minor buffs to Firion's teleportation cooldown, as well as a slight buff to his not so often purchased shard by 1 second. Necro's magic damage received decreased from 40 to 25 is actually a very huge buff for Necro, meaning he'll now do a lot better against lineups that have a lot of magic damage at their disposal. Nyx's Spike Curb is receiving quite a heavy nerf on its stun duration, almost half a second at max level. Ogre Magi yet again being buffed with a small amount of health regen. A light nerf to Pengolir's 15 talent, making him less good with Aghanim Scepter in particular. Slightly more health regen on PA, combined with the mana cost of Phantom Strike being decreased, meaning PA can become a threat faster. Primal Beast Onslaught has had its damage adjusted down in the first levels, with his run no longer continuing if he's stunned, much like the nerf they gave Timbersaul's Timber Chain way back when. A bit of a damage buff to Puck's Stream Coil. This will be especially nasty for her early level ganking. Putch nerfs slightly in his health regen for laning stage, with a cooldown on Flesh Heap on later levels for the hero, meaning he's slightly worse later in the game, and at farming creep camps with Flesh Heap. 100 cast range on Nether Blast for Puckna is quite a big buff for the little man, given how much Nether Blasting you're already doing in your average match. He will now be significantly better at high ground pushing. Some interesting changes for Quab, trying to make her Aghanim Scepter more alluring, with the radius now being 400 and ground targetable. Her Sonic Wave cooldown being significantly better than before, all the way down to 90 seconds at level 18, with her 20 talent now able to take it down to 50. Razor has had his shot upgraded by 25 damage and has seen a big increase in win rate from this. His level 10 talent has also gotten a whole 3+ agility buffed, this is quite a lot. Rubik has had his base damage increased by 3. This is quite potent for his early game harassment. Sand King now has +2 higher base damage than before, with his caustic finality lasting 1 more second. Slightly more radius to Shadow Demon's Disseminate, moving up by 75. Shadow Fiend's level 20 talent has had his Requiem talent nerfed by 0.1, making the ability now worse than before. A slightly lower mana cost on Ether Shock for Shadow Shaman, with a bit more damage attainable for Shackles at level 10. Silencer's Arcane Curse, understandably, has had its radius reduced significantly. This matters greatly in the laning stage, and even by 25 radius at max level. Snapfire's level 10 Scatter Blast talent is now slightly better. Sniper Shrapnel has seen quite a nerf due to its radius not being as dominating on mid as it was before, with a slightly higher mana cost associated with it too. Storm now has 0.1 more mana regen in his kit from the start of the game. Yes, this is a very small buff. Sven's Aghanim Shard bonus lowered by 1 level from 7 to 6. This is gonna make his momentum a bit worse than before. Techies has had his Sticky Bomb cast point half compared to before, the ability now being much harder to dodge for the opponent when thrown. He's now a lot more of a nuisance in the initial laning stage in particular. A small buff to Templar Assassin lets her spring fully loaded traps faster by half a second. Slight cooldown decrease to Terrablade's Reflection, only on the first 3 levels though, so predominantly for the laning stage as well. A small buff to Timber's Saw Shard, increasing it by 1 second, as well as his level 25 talent that was already really good at 10, now being increased to 12. Tiny's Avalanche having its radius decreased in later levels make the hero quite a bit less powerful in fights, due to his stun not being able to hit as many opponents as before. His Aghanim's ability has had a very light nerf of 2 seconds. Treant Protector's Leech Shield primarily got buffed here, with its cast point being improved, the range significantly improved, up to 150 range at max. And its damage and heal increased on all levels. His ult now also does slightly more tick damage than before. If you're a player that likes Treant, he just got a serious buff here. Troll Warlord now has 2 more base agility than before, making him stronger and tankier, especially in the early game and coming into mid game. His Battle Trance talent at level 20 has been improved by 5%. More nerfs coming the way of Undying, this time in both his 15 talents with his zombies being worse, as well as his heal. Viper having had both his Nether Toxin buffed in the form of decreased mana cost, with his Aghanim's Nosedive having had its cast range increased by 75 radius. His corrosive skin damage per second increased from 13 to 18 is quite a powerful increase to his talent, with his 15 talent getting 3% more magic resistance. A slight nerf to Visage Shard, making him able to heal slightly less, as well as personally stunning his opponents. Warlock yet again seeing his upheavals damage increase all the way up to 110 at max level now, meaning he can reach some pretty nasty numbers. His Golem has also had its armor improved by 2 on all levels. Wind Raider now has slightly more base damage than before, increased by 2, with a bit more mana regen to boot. This is gonna make her quite a bit more annoying in the initial stages of the game. Her Windrun Radius talent at 10 is also slightly better. And lastly, Wraith King has had his Wraithfire Blast combo significantly increased after the Skeleton's initial nerf, with the projectile now traveling faster and the Skeletons now getting an additional 25 movement speed and attack speed when they target the enemy that got hit by the blast itself. And that's what I have to say about 732D. I'll see you guys with another patch analysis as soon as 733 finally drops. Thank you for watching.